thanks to the other panelists, and thanks to all of you for being here this morning. Now that you're all wondering my connection, I was once cast in a play as you at Stanford University in the play 8. I don't know if I hope all of you had a chance to see that play. It was a pivotal moment in my life for a lot of reasons. Anyway, it was an honor. And it's an honor to be in this room and to speak with this incredible lineup of speakers. Your work is so inspiring, and it blows me away. I want to talk a little bit about tech. That is true. But I want to do it in a context. I want to be clear about the context in which I discuss technology. So I was a software engineer. I'm not anymore, but I was for 10 years. I now run the Human Rights Program at Benetech. We do not sell anything at the Human Rights Program. That's not what we do. We don't make products for sale. If there's a potential to make a profit or make money from a tech solution or product, we won't do it. That doesn't mean no one should do it. Actually, definitely someone should do it. It just means it won't be us. It'll be someone else. I will leave that to the market to take care of. So we work on issues for which there's probably never going to be a profit, or at least not one easily obtained. That's where I believe human rights kicks in. That's when rights are needed the most, when there's not a market, when there's not political power of another sort or cultural power. That's when you fall back on rights. That's when you reach for human rights as a way to get the kind of social change you're working for. When I was a kid, my family won a computer. I was a kid growing up in Wyoming. I had never seen a computer before, but we won a computer from a grocery store sweepstakes. My mom entered a drawing, and we won. And I was really excited because I went to the library, so I was already a nerd, and the library had books about how to write computer code. I didn't really care about writing computer code, but I wanted to write books and stories, and I figured out how I could use a computer to do that. To tell stories that were interactive. Basically, I made computer programs that were like choose-your-own-adventure books. It was really exciting to me. Around the same time, a while after that, after I became a computer programmer and was working at Boeing and then at Microsoft, these were sort of the glory days of the early internet. Another kid from Wyoming, John Perry Barlow, a lyricist for the Grateful Dead and founder of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, penned the Declaration of the Independence of Cyberspace. This was inspiring, soaring prose addressed to governments of the industrial world, you weary giants of flesh and steel. I come from cyberspace, the home of the mind. On behalf of the future, I ask you of the past to leave us alone. You are not welcome among us. You have no sovereignty where we gather. These were idealistic words, and it turns out it doesn't really work that way. Very shortly after that, in 1999, Professor Lawrence Lessig wrote his essay on the law, what he called the law of the horse, what cyber law might teach, arguing that the law needed to take cyberspace seriously. Why? Because there is nothing to guarantee that the regime of values constituted by code will be a liberal regime, and little reason to expect that an invisible hand of code writers will push it in that direction. This is in tension with the Declaration of the Independence of Cyberspace. John Perry Barlow and many others, including me, imagine cyberspace as an empowering place where anybody who could learn to write code could show up, claim power, push for change, restructure the way the world was formed. That was true for a lot of people who got involved back in those days. It was true for the founders of Google. It was true for the founders of Facebook, for Apple. It was true for them. It was true where I worked at Microsoft in many ways. But at Microsoft, we started to see the beginning of a different kind of trend, from decentralizing power to reconfiguring power and then re-centralizing it. So one of tech's great possibilities is to restructure power relationships. It can make things possible that were not possible before. It can empower people who were not empowered before. But anything that restructures power relationships is dangerous to people who are in power, and they will want to control it. So that's what we're seeing now in technology. Many of you, when I was doing my PhD work at Berkeley, I told my law professors and my other professors that I wanted to do rights and software. And they said, perfect, you're in exactly the right place. Berkeley is the best law school in the world for intellectual property law, for copyrights. That's what they thought I meant. It was the only kind of rights and software that anybody at Berkeley was teaching at the time, which was strange. But I knew what I wanted to teach. It was hard to explain it to them. One of my mentors did not use email. His secretary printed his emails every Monday, and he would read them and write handwritten responses back. Lawyers thought they didn't need to worry about technology. That changed, but it changed because of intellectual property law, because there were ways to make money in intellectual property law. There are ways to turn a profit on that, so firms got really interested. Why am I bringing this up? Because I hear so often from lawyers that we don't do technology. It's not something we do. We don't understand it. Every single time I go in to talk to lawyers or a pro bono firm or a human rights organization, I always hear from human rights advocates and from lawyers, we don't do tech, it's not our thing, that's why we went to law school. The thing is, you definitely do tech. It's not true. You do tech. All of your law firms have a tech practice. You have lawyers who have figured out tech. You can figure it out when you're determined that there's a reason to figure it out. We're all smart people. One of the great things about being a lawyer is that you learn how to figure out what you don't know and throw yourself into it anyway. So that's important because I'm going to invite you to find out ways you can use technology as part of a holistic approach to your practice. And I'm going to, in these remarks, I'm going to share with you some criticisms that I make when I present to tech audiences. So, which is what I do most of the time. I'm talking to people who operate in the tech world trying to advance human rights, and I tell them why they're having such trouble doing it. But a lot of what I'm going to say is applicable to lawyers as well. So I want you to keep that in mind because I'm trying to help build a bridge between the work that you do and the work of tech that seems so frustrating. I have here a laptop taped to a podium because we haven't figured out any other way to make it stay here. This happens everywhere I go. We run into tech problems, and everyone thinks, wow, that's hilarious. You know, like you think you're going to change the world with this stuff, and we can't even do a presentation. So there are important lessons to learn from that. And I get why people are so frustrated with tech, because it's always failing to live up to its promises when it comes to human rights. There are reasons for that, and it's not just because we don't understand tech. There are lots of reasons why tech didn't work the way that it was promised to work on human rights. One of them is the reconfiguration of power dynamics that I talked about earlier. There are countless examples of new technology paired with good intentions that goes horribly wrong. So I wrote an essay with a couple of colleagues of mine in The Guardian earlier this year about how the mantra at Facebook, this famously was their mantra, move fast and break things, doesn't work when lives are at stake. It doesn't work in human rights context because you can't just make a quick change to some code and then see how it goes, see if you make money or lose money. You can't take big risks when you're talking about other people's lives who are not involved in designing the software that you're working with. So, as I sometimes say, the road of human rights and software is strewn with the skeleton frames of failed apps and crushed ambitions. How many human rights organizations have built an app and then realized that convincing people to install it isn't just hard, it's a multi-million-dollar endeavor that you have to put serious resources behind? Is there a way to differentiate in advance the good bets from the bad bets? In a way, this is what venture capitalists try to do. They try to predict the future and then bet on it. But if we transfer the rules of venture capital to human rights work, we will fail. There are different rules with different priorities. So what can we do? Well, we need to ask, why does tech have such a hard time with human rights? One of the reasons is because tech solutions might be the problem. So I took this picture in Hamburg at the G20 protest, but this slogan is also spray painted on the side of a building in San Francisco. What do I mean when I say your solution might be the problem in tech? One of the biggest, I think in the last couple of years, the biggest wins for human rights and technology was the app called WhatsApp incorporating end-to-end encryption by default into its software. This was great. I mean, this changed the lives of hundreds of millions of people around the world, maybe billions, because it made it harder for governments to intercept their communications. It also made it harder for cyber criminals or bored teenagers in Vermont to spy on their communications. This was definitely a good move. But what problem did it solve? It solved a problem that WhatsApp created in the first place by making those conversations vulnerable to governments or to bored teenagers or to cyber criminals by putting them in an online medium and not encrypting them and transmitting them over wires that were easily snooped. So, huge win in human rights and technology, but we need to keep in perspective, it solved a problem that it created. So, at best, we're back where we started, and that was the biggest win. So, that's important to remember because it frames up what exactly it is that we're trying to do. Okay, so what are we trying to solve exactly? And who is designing what we're trying to, these solutions? In this context, for both tech and for lawyering, we must take seriously white supremacy, patriarchy, heteronormativity, and ableism in tech design and deployment, and in human rights. So many stories about tech gone bad start with someone who is probably looks a lot like me, trying to solve a problem for someone else. Maybe there are good intentions, and maybe it's some white techno-saviorism going on. Either way, these approaches are less effective and can be massively harmful. Technologists sometimes approach the serious, long-standing problems of human rights as if the reason those problems exist is because a really smart person hasn't thought about that problem yet. I refer to this as Morozov did, the problem of solutionism. Solutionists err, according to Morozov, by assuming rather than investigating the problems they set out to tackle. This happens over and over and over again, not just by technologists, but also by lawyers. And when you see lawyers coming together with technologists to try to do something for human rights, sometimes those tendencies, those white savior or tech utopian tendencies converge and amplify each other, and you start to see ridiculous things. You start to get headlines like this one, Africa, there's an app for that. One of the most insulting headlines I've ever seen, but it turns up everywhere. Those are just a few examples. You also get things like this app, which is particularly shameworthy, Good to Go. This was an app to solve sexual assault by allowing people to pre-register consent. I don't know if you can see any problems with that. Basically, the problem that these designers were trying to solve was how do you give perpetrators a better defense in court? That was the problem that I think they were trying to solve. So no matter how they framed it, no matter how they still frame it on their website, that app's core function by design was to preserve evidence to use against a survivor at trial. So now there's an app for that, really gross app. So why did that happen? You got to ask yourself, who's designing this technology? Is it a dude like me? Probably, in that case, right? Who is designing this technology? And who are we? So I took this picture at an event I went to in San Francisco that was a Tech for Good event, Hack Democracy, I think. The stated purpose of this event was to, pardon my American, unfuck democracy. But one of the problems was they weren't sure what democracy being fucked was like. They didn't understand what was wrong with it. And these were the categories of people that you could be when you were invited. So they encourage you to take a dot and put it on your name tag. Engineer, designer, government policy, business strategy, other. Those were the categories. I don't know, which category would you fit in if you came to this event to fix democracy? So I love this quote. I wish it would dawn upon engineers that in order to be an engineer, it is not enough to be an engineer. I feel like this is true for lawyers, and so that's what I'm trying to encourage you to embrace. Remember who you are when you're working with technology or when you're grappling with should you make an investment in technology, should you make an investment in some sort of tool. Remember who you are and why you're doing the work that you're doing. Your lawyers, you know where you want to steer the ship. You know where you're trying to go. Don't let them tell you where you need to go. Don't let them. They don't know. They don't know. By the same token, challenge yourself. You might not know as well as you think you do where you need to go. And tech might give you some opportunities to get there differently than a way you thought about it before. I loved what Evan said earlier from the Utah Supreme Court decision. Sometimes it's not about the law that needs to change. Sometimes it's about people's understanding that needs to change. And in that case, tech can help you, but it's not going to help you by making you file cases faster or more efficiently. It can help, although it can do that, but where you get the really big gains is when it helps you to scale up ideas. So there are things you can do with technology, sure, to one of the big horrible examples of the past couple of years was trying to create apps to give to refugees by people like me, right, who didn't really understand at all what the context was. Now there are efforts underway, as we've heard about here, get refugees empowered and able to actually build technology for themselves or for their counterparts because they understand those contexts. Those kinds of initiatives make, I think, a lot more sense. But remember that technology isn't magic. It's not like the loaves and the fishes. It's not like tech can scale up food for people. Tech can allow you to take pictures of food and post them to Instagram and get a lot of likes. That's what it will scale up. But it won't scale up the food. You have to do the work. And that's what the speakers here have already talked about, doing the work. And that's what all of you are engaged in. Think about technology as a way to help you make your work more efficient, help you spend your time doing the things that you want to do, and maybe even help you think a little bit outside the box about what your job might be. Think about finding someone in your firms or in your organizations to act as a kind of general counsel for technology. We call them CTOs in the tech sector. But a general counsel can serve as a translator between your outside counsel and your in-house counsel, right? A translator between what your business needs to do and what outside counsel needs to do. A general counsel keeps outside counsel honest. It makes sure they don't rip you off in billing. It makes sure outside counsel doesn't overbill. It helps. General counsel helps translate. You can have that function in your organizations to help you understand and translate technology and get a lot farther along. So I'll leave you with this last thing. Technology is neither good, nor is it bad, nor is it neutral. Just hearkening back to this idea that technology will restructure power relationships. You cannot afford to ignore it. You can't afford to say, we don't do that. Your enemies are doing it. Your enemies are doing it right now. Your opponents, your adversaries are doing it right now. You have to be in the game, but approach it in a smart way, in a holistic way, using some of the lessons that we've talked about earlier today. Thank you.